So here's the stat I have, and Jimmy or Caleb jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but no live ball penalties called against an opponent that Tennessee has played in the last two games. And then Caleb brought up one live ball penalty in their opponents in the last three road games. So, Jimmy, let me ask you, is that just coincidence? Is there something to that? Is that just bad officiating? And it's brought to you by our friends at Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Enjoy life when you see better. Local vision service for LASIK, cataract surgery, and regular eye examinations. Look at me. No contacts, no glasses, ccteyes.com, ccteyes.com. So, Jimmy, what do you make of the officiating that hasn't helped Tennessee recently?
Well, I think some of them need LASIK surgery. That would help. I think Alabama, it was poor officiating. They missed some blatant holding calls, no question about that. I didn't see as much against Kentucky. It is an odd statistic, and I didn't know that. I knew the stat about Alabama and Kentucky. I didn't know it was just once in the previous road game as well. Here's something and I don't know the answer to this. How many live ball fouls have been called against opponents coming into Neyland Stadium? You know, that I don't know the answer to that, or the penalty difference between the Tennessee and the opponent when they play at Neyland. So we're talking about the road trips for Tennessee. What's happening at home? I'd be curious to know those numbers. I don't know them. The other thing is, I don't think there's this conspiracy. I just think it was bad officiating against Alabama. I didn't see nearly the number of holding calls at Kentucky that were blatant that I saw in the Alabama game. So I do think typically, well, even if you go back to last year when Tennessee played Alabama, I may be a little bit off on this, Caleb, you can correct me. I think Alabama had 17 penalties against Tennessee in that game, and Tennessee had 6. And you don't think the Alabama fans were hollering conspiracy in that one? So I just think typically the road team is more penalized than the home team. And I don't like it because that certainly suggests there's a bias, right, that occurs. But I don't think there's any conspiracy against Tennessee in that regard, except the Alabama game.
Yeah, Jimmy, I don't think there's any conspiracy, but I thought really it was the second half of the Florida game that was really, really bad, where they didn't spot the ball on fourth down. They called a terrible illegal block on, I believe Jacob Warren got flagged for that block, or McCollum Castles was a terrible one. No calls on pass interference. What I think is happening, and I think you hit the nail on the head, I think the blame, there's no conspiracy, but the blame goes to the league office. Greg Sankey, and everybody, Dave knows I'm not the biggest Greg Sankey fan, just because of how I think he mismanaged the contract with ESPN, different story altogether. But I think he's following the Roger Goodell footsteps of being utterly cheap. And what I mean by that is there's so much money in the SEC and these officials aren't full-time. And if you don't have full-time officials, they're naturally going to get caught up in the home crowds, aren't they? That's just going to kind of be a human nature thing. And I think that's happening a lot of times with these officials in SEC games right now.
I don't think it's related to being full-time or not. NFL officials miss calls all the time.
Yeah, but they're also not full-time. No, they're not full-time.
Yeah, they're more full-time, but they're not. And I'll say this. I talked to, and Dave, you know him, the late Rocky Good. He told me he spent 30 to 40 hours a week on officiating because he watched film, he did this, he did that. I just don't think if you're a full-time official, it makes you better. Major umpires are full-time, and they screw up a lot of calls. So I don't think that has an impact at all, whether you're full-time or not. I just think the quick judgment is the problem. Now, do I think they should be held more accountable? I do. I think that after a game, there should be a pool reporter that goes in there and asks the referee, what about this call? What about that call? I think that should be there. They do it in the NCAA basketball tournament. So why can't you do it with the officials? Now, I've heard the excuse, well, you got to get the football officials off the field and out of the crowd and all that kind of stuff. But you still have an opportunity somewhere. Maybe it's on the van that transports them out of there. Maybe it's in their locker room afterward, where you can have some pool reporter ask them questions about different things and to make them more accountable. Now, there are SEC officials that get fired, but we don't know about it. Until the end of the year, we hear, well, the eight officials were not retained. We don't know why. We have a pretty good idea. Here's the other thing that I've been told, Caleb. The NFL is rating the SEC and taking their best officials. And therefore, the SEC officiating pool is getting worse and worse as the NFL takes SEC officials away because they pay more money in the NFL, obviously.
Wow,
Didn't know
I
that.
hadn't heard that. If I'm Sankey or the Big Ten commissioner or whoever heads up the NCAA now that Mark Emmert's gone, I want to get this officiating cleaned up because, Jimmy, I don't think it's good across college football. And we had talked, and Caleb and I've talked about trends. If you start to look at them, the NFL's dipping a little bit. College football is going up. We could see a time in the next 5 years where they're rivals as far as viewership, much closer than they are now. And you don't want to put that product out there and one of your biggest games of the year is decided by a bad call by an official. Right. That's bad.
It is. And I'll say this, and this is obviously debatable. I wonder if officiating has been bad all these years, but we weren't exposed to as many games, and we didn't have HD TV to really identify a bad call. Did he step out of bounds? Did he not step out of bounds? What is a catch? Some of those things. So I just wonder if the officiating's been about the same through these years. It's just under greater scrutiny, and we've got replay, and we've got HD TV to better identify it when you watch these games. So I'm not sure about that. I think it's a possibility, but there's no doubt the officiating needs to be improved. And I really don't have a great answer to doing that other than perhaps to hold the officials more accountable.
Yeah, I think part of it, I agree with you. Well, I don't know if I do agree with you, but I wonder, Jimmy, if you think maybe part of this is, wouldn't part of it be, I think it is worse now, but wouldn't part of it be because, I mean, you compare officiating to 30 years ago, offenses just move so much faster now. I mean, Josh Heupel's offense alone. I mean, it's much harder to officiate football games now than it was 30 years ago, where you huddled up, ran 20 seconds off the play clock, and then called a play.
Did you get off of that Harvard study? Where you got that? That's a good point, Caleb. It is. The athletes are bigger, stronger, faster. They run up-tempo offense. It makes it harder to call a game. I think basketball has gone that way as well. It's harder to call basketball now than it used to be because of how athletic and how fast these guys are. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it's harder to call the game now because of the pace of the game and how good these athletes are.
Jimmy, we'll have your prediction column later in the week, but Tennessee, I think, is going to win against UConn. This just in. Are there any couple of three things that if a Tennessee's fan base you think would most like to see other than just beating UConn this weekend?
Yeah, they want to see Nico Iamaleava play about 4 series.
Yeah, a lot.
They want to see a lot of that. I want to see a couple of things. We saw Dante Thornton finally have a decent game, 3 catches, 63 yards. Can he continue that? Because they really need him to emerge if they're going to have a successful last 3 games. So that would be one thing. Here's the other one. Can they convert 3rd and 1 against UConn by running the football?
They better be able to.
I've written a column. I'm about to post it, Dave, for you, and I didn't get it finished before. But Tennessee, even on 4th downs, Tennessee is 3 for 13 on 4th down this year, and they are 1 of 9 on 4th downs against SEC opponents, and they're terrible in the red zone at scoring touchdowns. And they were best in the country a year ago with that. So I've written something about that. Glenn Edelby's got a couple of quotes along those lines, which we'll be posting. But that would be one thing. They're just not very good. And one of the things he said, and I've been on this bandwagon for a while, Tennessee runs the ball successfully when they spread the field and the defense only has 5 or 6 in the box. When they go to a bunch formation, this offensive line is not a big, strong, powerful offensive line. It's more of a finesse line, getting your way, just kind of stifle somebody, neutralize the defensive play, and then let your running backs find the holes. When they go into this bunch deal where they got 8 or 9 in the box on defense, Tennessee doesn't run the ball effectively. And I think they need to just run out of the spread on 4th and 1. And they also have to have a quarterback that's willing to run that situation. And we have seen a more willing runner out of Joe Milton the last 2 games.
I would also like to see some toss sweeps, some horizontal running game, and some jet sweeps, maybe to a squirrel white. I think the running game's a little overly simplistic, to be honest with you.
And it's number one in the SEC.